Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathleen Drum, TIFF's Industry Director, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the TIFF Industry Conference. Today we are poised to begin 7 days packed with topical, provocative, important subjects. Our hardworking programming team, Lynn Crocker, Karina Rotenstein, and Neil McPherson have assembled a lineup of industry titans, master filmmakers, expert practitioners, and innovators. We want you to come away informed, inspired, and up to date. I'm so looking forward to it. Before we get started, I'd like just to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors and supporters who make everything TIFF does possible. Our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oréal Paris, and Visa, and our major industry sponsors, the Ontario Media Development Corporation and Telefilm Canada. I'd also like to honour the original keepers of the land, which we know of today as Toronto, by honouring the Mississaugas of New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. Thank you for hosting us here today and for hosting TIFF year-round. We are here today at one of the world's great film festivals, and while the stars are in town and audiences are flocking to 300 films from 83 countries, 7,500 filmmakers, actors, press, and industry have arrived. And we know that you're here to do business. You're here to talk finance and deals, to promote your films and be discovered, to establish meaningful connections, to learn and to be inspired, and that's exactly what we have on offer for you at TIFF. The main mission of this year's conference is to create space and opportunity for access and inclusion into the industry for more people. And in the process, we've embraced community building, networking, and collaborations. We've partnered with over 15 groups and launched a new series of connections events to bring depth and meaning to key conversations. We also have a new relationship with The Guardian, who will host a series of talks with directors and talent during the conference. Please also use the TIFF environment to build your networks. Go to parties, hang out in festival streets, cafes and bars, and come along, please, to our daily happy hours starting tonight at 5:30 p.m. in the lobby. We want you to go home with plenty of new friends and contacts. So let's get into it. Our first session today is sponsored by our great friend and collaborator, the Ontario Media Development Corporation. And we're kicking off with a topic that has truly captured attention and created debate around the world: the significance and the impact of Brexit. We are in unknown territory. What's going to happen and when? Who will it affect and how? I am pleased to welcome the moderator of today's session, journalist Jeremy Kay, who will introduce our panel. Jeremy is the US editor of Screen International. He covers the international film business and is a familiar face on the festival circuit. He also covers the awards season, box office, production, and finance. Please now, everyone, give your full attention to Jeremy Kay and our panel of experts: Isabel Davis from the BFI, Paul Webster from Shoebox Films, Katie Kotick from the BFC, Robbie Allen from Creative Scotland, and join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first day of this TIFF Industry Conference, kicking off with this dialogue on Brexit and the UK film industry, what happens now. I'm going to start by just going down the line and just introducing everybody, and then I'll ask each of the panelists just to tell us briefly what they do in their day-to-day job, and then we'll go back down the line and start talking about how they've been reacting to the news. Before we start, just to recap, as you all know, June the 23rd, there was the referendum in the UK, and the decision was taken to leave the EU. That has not happened yet, and this is going to be quite a long process. a lot of negotiations need to be worked out, and the UK government has to devise its strategy. Then it will trigger Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, and that will kick off the 2-year negotiation process. But until that happens, I think the message is it's business as usual, and you're going to hear a lot from our experts here about what they think and the way ahead. So first we have, going down the line, we have Isabel Davis, who's the head of International at the British Film Institute. Next to Isabel is Robbie Allen, who is Senior Screen Executive at Creative Scotland. Next to Robbie is producer Paul Webster, who has produced Denial, which is in the festival, making its world premiere here, I believe. And then at the end we have Katie Kotok, who is the EVP of US Productions at the British Film Commission. So, Isabel, if you can start by telling us briefly what you do.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Morning, everyone. Lovely to see you all here. I'm head of international at the BFI, and my day-to-day, and certainly prior to the 23rd of June, is obviously overseeing the international strategy for the BFI in its entirety. I assume people know what the BFI is, but just for those of you who are sort of new to the UK, we are the lead agency for film in the UK. We've existed for over 80 years, and in addition to being if you like, the industrial public-facing agency where we support the production, development, distribution, exhibition of films, we also look after screen heritage, education, and so forth. So we really do have, I suppose, the Telefilm Canada's role, if that's more familiar to any of you here. So my role oversees all of the international strategy, and on the day-to-day, I'm very directly involved with international co-production treaties, helping advise the UK industry and the international industries how they can work together. I'm also part of the editorial team at the BFI, which means that I support projects the development and production stage. So that's the day-to-day. I'd love to say as well that one thing this process has highlighted is that the BFI has a real wealth of strategic expertise. In fact, our strategist-in-chief is here in Toronto, Kerry Morgan, who's brilliant. We're very lucky to have her, particularly during this process. But so the BFI's role as a strategist and, of course, as the body that speaks directly to government is rather coming into its own at this point.
Thank you. Robbie?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm the Senior Screen Executive at Creative Scotland. For those of you who maybe don't know the organisation that well, Creative Scotland is the lead organisation in Scotland for the arts, screen and creative industries. So we don't just look after the film and television and digital industry, we also look after all the other art forms, theatre, music, literature, design. I work solely in our screen department, which is a team of about 12 people, working across all the similar areas to the BFI. The one we aren't directly involved as in heritage. We don't look after the National Archive of Scotland. But in terms of film funding, strategy and advocacy, we look after Scotland. My day-to-day role is generally I look after most of the funds, which cover everything from film festivals right down to development of new talent, filmmaking talent in film and television. One of the, I think, key points for Creative Scotland, and certainly the work that I'm currently doing with colleagues in the organisation and in national organisations around Brexit, is Brexit will also affect the rest of the creative industries and the arts, and I work within an organisation that's also putting together strategic responses across all of those kind of art forms. So we do get the benefit of hearing what our colleagues in the other areas of the cultural sector are doing as well. Thanks.
Hi everybody, I'm Paul Webster. I'm, as Jeremy said, a film producer. I've been doing that for the last 30 years. I've been in the business about 45 years, spent a lot of time in distribution and exhibition before becoming a producer. Run Shoebox Films right now, which is a loose collective of producers and one director, Joe Wright, who I work with periodically. And my partner, Guy Healy's with us at the festival for his film Denial, which I actually didn't produce. I wish I had, because it's a very good movie, but it's Guy did that job. And obviously as a practitioner, I'm very, very interested in what's happening now, unfortunately, with Brexit, and how it impacts on our industry. So I hope to shed a little light for you on how it works at the cutting edge. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Katie. I head up the LA office of the British Film Commission, and our main remit is to support projects that are coming out of the US and Canada that are interested in shooting, doing post and VFX in the UK. So we basically support executives, producers, industry personnel with any questions, queries they may have with regard to producing their project over there. A lot of the work that we do is around the tax incentives, both for film and television, explaining how you qualify, understanding what costs qualify, that type of thing. We work with anyone from studio executives to new producers. Fortunately for me, I get to work with a lot of people like that are on stage. We work closely with the BFI, with Creative Scotland, with UK producers. It's important to note that our remit is UK-wide, so it's both for in and around London, but also for projects like Outlander in Scotland or The Collection in Wales, which are two TV series that are being done in the UK.
Okay, thanks everyone. So now let's start by talking about, your responses to the vote and what has been done, because nobody's been sitting around on their hands. A lot's already in play. And Isabel, the BFI set up a screen sector task force, which is feeding its findings into the government. Just talk us through what's been happening since the vote.
Thanks for that. So yes, indeed, the BFI has pulled together a screen task force. So of course that's far beyond just film, it's TV as well as video games. So all the key players from those sectors have come together already to express their concerns, look at what the possible threats are, also, of course, the opportunities such as they are. And I think that the first thing to say is that, this might seem pretty obvious to anyone who's had a conversation with anyone in the creative industries, but the response from industry has been very much that we want to remain as close with Europe as possible. It's very clear that people are keen very much to preserve that relationship. So I don't think that we are looking in any way to sort of disengage. In fact, of course, this process is going to look at ways in which we can become closer and indeed look at other international opportunities. I think it's also worth saying at this point that in addition to the British industry wishing to maintain its relationship with Europe, we have a government that is incredibly supportive of creative industries. We represent a sector between 5 and 8%, depending on how you define that sector, of GDP, and we have what in government parlance is a green arrow next to our sector, which means we're a growth industry, and that makes us a sector that really need support. We've also had the new films minister repeatedly express his commitment to the tax credit. In fact, he did so at the BFI just this morning, so we know that we have a government that is listening and wants to hear from the industry about its concerns over the next period. If I'm allowed to say something else as well, I think, of course, everyone has sort of felt that this is something that immediately needs to be solved. Well, of course, if you said, Jeremy, Article 50 hasn't been triggered yet, and then we're told that there's a period of 2 years whereby we must conclude negotiations. But it's worth saying that if you look back to the last European country that left the EEC, it was Greenland in, I think, 1982. It had been a member for about 9 years, somewhat smaller country, somewhat shorter period of membership, and the key issue was fisheries. It's a major industry there, and it took them 3 years to leave. So I think what we're talking about is a period of time that is going to be rather extended. However we look at it, this is a very, very complicated process. It's a marriage that's going to take quite a lot of time to untangle. And in the meantime, I think the key message is that nothing changes whatsoever. So until those negotiations are concluded, we are exactly as we have always been.
Yeah. Can you give us a little more inkling into what those task force findings have been, or is it too soon to say?
Well, I mean, in addition to the fact that I think everyone is pulling in the same direction, for me anyway, one of the good things is that whether or not you talk to producers, distributors, exhibitors, the visual effects industry, the studios, actually everyone is sort of coalescing over the same few issues. So in a way, that's good. We're not in any way in conflict with one another. And I would say there are probably 5 issues. Let's maybe take them one by one as we go through, otherwise you'll get sick of my voice. But of course, everyone's been very concerned about international co-production, the stability of the tax credits and the framework of certification around that, membership of Creative Europe, the status of British film and TV with regard to European work status under AVMSD, and the framework of European law around that, and of course freedom of movement of goods and labour. So I think those are the key issues that we know are of, let's say, concern or interest. Some of those are already resolved. So again, I mean, perhaps we can take them one by one if you like, but there are some already good news stories about a lot of those issues.
Yes, let's come back to those. I just want to move on to you, Robbie. Tell us a little bit about, what's been going on with Creative Scotland.
Well, I think before I can move on to that, I think it's probably from a personal perspective, and to give a little bit of context around it, the result to leave the European Union did actually hit everybody in the country with a little bit of shock. I think the majority of people were actually expecting it not to happen. And the vote was quite, it wasn't as clear-cut as you would imagine. It was quite a shock. What we, obviously, so the entire country was in a state, so well, what do we do now? So it's not just about the screen industry and the creative industry. What, from our perspective in Creative Scotland, from my perspective, what I found really encouraging was very quickly the people in our industry got together and got round the table. Now, I think that was because in the past 2, 3, 4 years, the industry and the sector as a whole in the UK have been much, much better at coming together to talk about strategy and to talk about advocacy and talk about funding. The way that we work with the British Film Commission now, together as the UK, remembering the UK is already there's 3 countries within the UK and 1 province. We have devolved government. All those structures are set up. The structures within the screen industry that have been set up over the past couple of years means that we could come together very, very quickly, coalesce around what we thought the issues were, and then go into a planning mode. And I think that's given us the confidence to say back to our industry as the lead body, it's okay, we've got this in hand. We don't, none of us know exactly what the outcome is going to be, but all the right people are sitting around the right table, at the table. They've come together very quickly, and we already have the formation of plans in place. And because we all know that stability is one of the key factors to any industry, and I think it's obviously very, very important within the creative industries and with screen, because it is such a volatile sector and a volatile market. So if the likes of ourselves at Creative Scotland, working with the BFI, working with our industry partners in these task force, can provide that confidence, I think that's going to be important as we go through every step of what happens next.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Paul, what are your sort of immediate reactions?
Well, apart from horror, which I still wake up every morning thinking, no, that's a bad dream. I think what the key message for today really is that things are carrying on exactly as they have been. That we have, fortunately, as Robbie and Isabel have said, we've got strong relationship as an industry with government. We are a growth industry. We realise that we punch above our weight in terms of what we bring to the UK. And unlike a lot of, we had some fairly horrific reactions to the Brexit vote with a lot of racist hate crime appearing, with people thinking that this was carte blanche to throw out all foreigners from Britain. And if we transpose that notion to the film industry, a lot of what we do, it does not involve the EU. The tax credit is not an EU mandated situation. It's in UK law, and that is one of the key drivers for our industry over the last 15 or so years. So that is unaffected, and that is a huge element in what we do. International co-productions as a producer, all those are still in place, still going on, and probably will be unaffected. So as the other guys have said, working with Creative Europe and the EU Media Fund and so on is going to be very, very tricky, and I hope in the long run we'll be able to maintain that process. As a producer, personally, about 80% of what I do involves working with American companies. So, relatively speaking, I'll be unaffected. But in the independent sector, the vast majority of producers do rely heavily on interaction with our European partners, and that's the area that is of key concern, I think.
Okay, Katie.
I mean, everyone's pretty much touched on it already, but clearly my main realm is the incentive and communicating to all our partners in the US, North America, that, as they've all remarked, it's unaffected, and that because it is such a strong driver and that reliability and stability of incentives are key to people wanting to use them, you know, leaving it as is really the best option. I would say, too, that it helps that we've been out in the U.S. for many years, and so we have a lot of strong relationships with both the film and television industry. And so for me, the key thing is just key communication with all those people. So making sure that they're updated as things progress and fielding any concerns that they might have, and then feeding that back directly into the UK industry.
And do you feel that by and large the UK, your US partners understand that a lot is going to be out, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, I've been surprised that I haven't gotten as many kind of panicked phone calls as I thought that I might. That I think people realize that it's been working successfully. In fact, the film credit worked so successfully that they basically modeled the UK TV tax credit on the film incentive, and now that's been in effect for 3+ years and is, you know, on a nice growth chart, I guess. And I mean, the other thing that to mention is clearly exchange rate is key in terms of US, Canadian, UK, and if anything, with the fluctuation in rate, it's been favorable to US productions going into the UK and potentially getting a little bit more bang for their buck. So.
Okay, great. Robbie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just I think it might be worth saying that the co-production treaties that are in place, so especially because we're here in Canada, the co-production treaty with the UK and Canada isn't affected by Brexit.
No, quite. I mean, all of our bilateral agreements and the European Convention remain exactly as they are. Nothing is affected on that level at all. To explain a tiny bit about the European Convention, it's an instrument of the Council of Europe, which has, last time I checked, 43 signatories to it, which includes Russia, the Ukraine, Turkey. So, you know, even if we were to leave the EEA, that agreement is completely unaffected, which is great news.
Which is actually puts it in a good place, considering some of the other industries. So it would be a negotiation. So the only one that would be affected, as I understand, is the European Convention. That may have to be.
No, the European Convention is absolutely stable. The European Convention has been going under review anyway, but that's not, that doesn't really speak to the issues around Brexit and negotiations. So whether or not you're from Norway or from Canada or Morocco or China, you can still work with the UK under those co-production agreements.
And I think that's a point for anybody else working with the UK, and certainly from internally to talk back to our sector, is actually all the different trade negotiations that we're going to start coming up in the news with the government negotiating them probably aren't around our sector. It's other people's sectors. So I think there's probably a lack of understanding of that actually we already have quite good treaties and agreements in place, and it doesn't look as if any of them are going to be affected.
Right.
And I'm not sure that message is probably getting out at home either.
No, quite. I mean, I think that you and I, Robbie, will be and Katie indeed, will be spending a lot of our time just, maybe we should get some T-shirts printed, you know, no change to the European Convention, no change to the bilateral co-production treaties. And, and by the way, the tax credit's fine, to be on the back.
And also just to follow on about the currency exchange, again, it's clear that instability in any market creates that fluctuation. There was quite doom-laden warnings about what was going to happen to the pound after the vote to leave. It didn't materialise. It's rallied again. Now, it is going to fluctuate, I should imagine, over the course of negotiations. Those fluctuations are based on perception rather than actual trade. And so when the media heats up around some of the issues that are going to come up over the next couple of years, then it will trade. It's going to be advantageous to a large extent to our partners in North America, but I'm not imagining it's going to be really a disadvantage within the UK as well. We're going to deal with that fluctuation.
Okay.
This might be a good moment as well to just touch on the cultural test in case anyone was concerned about that. I mean, Paul, you made Eastern Promises all those years. I guess that was a treaty co-production, wasn't it? But
Eastern Promises was obviously Canadian director, Mr. David Cronenberg. We made it in 2007, and it was a treaty co-production. But in order to qualify as a British movie, we had to hit the points on the cultural test, which I believe we need. I can't remember at the time. It was still 16 out of the 31.
was it? Yeah.
Yeah, I believe. And at the time, Viggo Mortensen, who's the lead actor in the film, qualified as a Danish passport holder. So that sort of situation is going to be endangered, is it not? By
Absolutely not, actually.
Okay,
I mean,
good.
The good news is that, I mean, so in
No
fact, so
problem.
the days of 16 out of 31, which is now 18 out of 35. In fact, with that change came a move to open up the not only the personnel on the film to be European, which was the case under the old cultural test, but even the content and the location, the language of the film can be European. Now, that wasn't something that was imposed on us by Europe. That was an acknowledgement about the nature of UK production that says, we are part of a European ecosystem, and this is what benefits us. This is a kind of system that we want to allow production to come to the UK. This is how we would like to calibrate things. And it's been very, very successful. So there's no reason whatsoever why that would change. Again, it's something that is a feature of UK law, so it's not something that would be affected by negotiations. And also, there's no reason at all to think that the UK government would seek to change that, because it's not something that would come from UK industry, and it's certainly not something that, you know, given huge production growth in the UK, is something that anyone is minded to change.
And I think we probably should have said this at the very beginning. The vote to leave the EU, the European Union is a political and financial structure, not a cultural one. Britain will still remain part of Europe, both in terms of where it is in the world, and culturally we are Europeans. Yeah. It's the political and fiscal structures around the European Union that will change.
Yeah, great point.
And again, I'm not sure that is coming across as clearly as it probably should. Yeah. It looks as if we're essentially saying, no, we're not European anymore. It's not that.
Well, even Boris Johnson, our foreign minister, on his first day in the job, and I was there in person at the French embassy as he was sort of making friends with the French, you know, almost quoted him.
As only he can.
You almost quoted him directly, Robbie. I don't know if you meant to, but he made a very clear point that we are not leaving Europe, and that spiritually, philosophically, geographically, it is an impossibility.
Did I just quote Boris Johnson?
I'm afraid you did. But it's a very good point, and one that absolutely stands for the creative industries. You know, it just doesn't seem conceivable that we could, even if we wanted to, disentangle ourselves spiritually and philosophically and morally and legally from Europe as a whole. It's just too symbiotic.
Right. So those are encouraging things for.
Can I just piggyback real quick on the cultural test? I do think it's worth pointing out that the certification unit at the BFI is very hands-on in terms of any questions or working with producers or working with people that want to try and bring their projects to the UK and pass the cultural test. So if there did happen to be any questions or concerns, they too very much would personally work with you to kind of figure out what the situation might be.
It's a really good point. To say once more, nothing is changing until these negotiations are concluded, which is some way away. But you can have a letter of comfort from the BFI certification team that will give you all the certainty that you need. Thank you for saying that, Katie. Yeah.
Okay, so that's encouraging for, you know, filmmakers here and everywhere to hear about, you know, the cultural elements and the tax credits being enshrined in UK law, that will not change, and other things that the panels have spoken about, panelists. But Isabel, I want to come back to the 5 issues that you mentioned. We've touched on some already, but one of them was movement of goods and labour. People moving through Europe for talent pools, bringing talent pools together for productions is a very important thing, and some of the other points. Can you elaborate on those?
Sure. So, of course, that's one of the major issues, and it's something that touches every part of the film and the wider screen sector, whether that's a visual effects company employing highly skilled European, actually non-EU workers in the UK, through to a production that might need very quickly to move through 5 countries, whether it's across Europe or further afield. So from whatever perspective, it's a key one. And I guess the first thing to say is that the screen industry isn't alone in this. The similar concerns will be held by the financial sectors, tech, anything that requires world-class talent, in a competitive way to be part of the projects that they are involved with. And again, government will want to look favourably on our sectors because of that, and to understand better the dependencies that we have on international labour and the ability of those people to move freely and easily. So again, we're in a happy situation that I think every part of the industry feels the same way, and it's something that we are already feeding into government to help them understand the key issues for that. So that's really where we are, is sort of providing case studies of productions or visual effects companies back to government so that they understand what the issues are when they go into negotiation.
Right. And then you've mentioned, and I think a few of you have mentioned Creative Europe. Can we explain to the audience what that is and what that does?
Sure. So Creative Europe is a program of the European Commission, has 2 important sub-programs. The media program is one. Most people know the bit that supports film and TV is the media program. There's also a huge cultural program as well called the Culture Program, which sits alongside it, these 2 sister programs. This is a pan-European program that supports almost every stage of the film sector. The one gap, if you like, is production. That's partly because you have Eurimage. So it's something that has come through very clearly from, again, every part of our sector, that continued membership of Creative Europe is an absolute priority. We know that there are precedents for a country within Europe but not part of the EU to be part of the programme. For example, Norway. So clearly this is something that through the circle of friends that we have in the industry from the screen sector and from TV, that we will be making that case very strongly to government on. We also know that we've got sort of guaranteed membership for the length of the negotiation. So again, it's not something that could possibly dry up in the shorter term.
Is it something that, am I right in thinking the UK is a member through 2020 as it stands, or?
I'm not sure it's that
No cut-off,
that guarantee, but yes, I mean, it's certainly, again, it's one of these things that is subject to the negotiating period. So the programme itself, I think, has some fundamental changes going on in 2020. The world moves on, whether or not, Brexit happens. So, of course, things may look a little different by 2020 anyway.
Okay.
And I'm reassured by some of the work that's going on in the task force that's been put together for the sector, is that, so even though it's saying, well, there are examples, there is precedent for a country that's not in the European Union being part of the cultural programme, we can't guarantee that that negotiation is going to be successful. But if it isn't, there's already talk around what do we do to make sure that that doesn't leave a deficit in terms of funding of those parts of the sector that currently access that funding.
Yeah.
So there's contingency planning going on around it. It's not just, well, Norway are in the cultural programme, so obviously we'll be able to negotiate that. It's not that foolhardy, the thinking about it, which I think is really encouraging from where we're sitting around the table. As an industry, we are born problem solvers. If anybody has ever tried to make a film, you know that you have to think of every single eventuality, because once you're there and once it's happening, you don't have that much option to stop and think. You have to have those plans in place. And I'm glad to say, and I hope it doesn't sound pat, but it does it does feel that these things are being thought through in a very careful way, which gives me a lot of kind of confidence that I can quite confidently say to our sector and the people that I work with, look, we've got this in hand, and we'll work through it as we come to it.
Yeah. And Creative Europe, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, so it, among other things, it funds a lot of training programs. It also provides support to UK distributors, doesn't it, on individual pitches and slates?
So it supports the circulation of European work, so absolutely. So if a UK distributor is taking a non-UK European film, then absolutely it's an absolutely critical part of their ecosystem for funding. So huge cultural role within Europe, and something that is highly valued by British distributors. Also, of course, European distributors rely upon it to release UK films. So it's an issue across our export sector as well, which of course is an absolute priority for government. So certainly in distribution terms is absolutely invaluable, but likewise on the level of development funding for British producers, particularly those that are working with European partners. It's hugely valuable.
Yeah, great. Paul, could you give us an idea about something you've made recently or are working on now, and how, you've touched on Eastern Promises, but how there's that interplay between other countries and the UK when you're putting something together, and maybe what funds you're drawing upon, how you assemble a project, and maybe how that might change after Brexit?
Well, as been mentioned before, if one is working on a project which qualifies as a co-production, it's not going to be impacted at all. There's a danger, I suppose, if in the fullness of time, I mean, not yet, but when Brexit has been achieved, that we, as a producer, if I'm making a film on mainland Europe, in France or something, that we have to deal with visas and the dreaded carnet system and so forth. So all the complications and trials and tribulations of making films outside of the European community could be visited upon us as producers, and that's what I sincerely hope doesn't happen, but it's a possibility. And we have to be prepared that, of course, we want everything to remain as business as usual, but we have to be prepared for the fact that things will change. We're in a dynamic situation here, so things will change. At the moment, I'm hard-pressed to think of anything that's going to be different for what I've got on my current slate. Small films or big films, it will be business as usual, which can only be good news.
Okay, great. Katie, can you talk a little bit more about the US side of things? Because I spoke to some the major studios before coming here, and they've all said that the films that they are going to shoot in the UK are staying exactly as they are, no change immediately.
Yeah.
But one does wonder, what are they thinking 5 years out, when they're doing slightly longer term planning? I mean, nobody knows really, but what's your sense of
I mean, my sense is that exactly like we've said, nothing's changing. They've been using the UK film tax credit for many years, and it's been successful, hence coming back and coming back and coming back. So until they would hear otherwise, my sense is that they would continue to plan to bring projects. And I mean, I think that the UK remains such a great hub for doing more globally relevant films and television shows that now, even more particularly in television, I'm seeing, because film's been doing it for years, but instead of, let's say, remaking the UK version of The Office for the US, now US companies want to get in on the UK projects that are being made. A great example of that is Left Bank producing this new television series, The Crown, that Netflix bought into as the UK-produced series for worldwide rights. And so I think that type of model is going to continue to flourish, and the UK is really the epicenter of where that can happen, because it's that bridge of the US and Europe, but still English language, familiarity, that type of thing. So.
Just to jump in, it's been extraordinary what's happened in the last couple of decades, and the way the industry has transformed itself. Ever since I've been in the industry, everybody's complained about the death of the British film industry. Until recently, you don't hear that anymore. The first movie I made in 1987 was one of 28 films made in Britain that year, and I believe we now make over 250 films a year. So we're talking about a huge success story. And from a goods and services point of view, the value that the American studios bring into our economy is absolutely enormous. And it's not just a tax credit. It's a combination of a tax credit and an enormous talent base, from crew through to actors, through to directors, which has grown exponentially over the past few years. And I can't see that changing. American filmmakers want to come to Britain to make their films, and the British government wants American companies here to spend their money. And it's a two-way street as well. You see a great migration of British talent across the Atlantic to Canada and to the US as well. So these things I cannot see being affected by Brexit at all. I don't know if anybody has an opinion.
I agree on the talent point for sure. I mean, it honestly makes my job pretty easy because people want to be working with the producers, the writers, the on-screen talent, and so it's more a matter of kind of mixing and matching and finding who should really work with who or what material is appropriate for who and that type of thing.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with that. I suppose that the other thing to say is that whilst nothing's changing with Brexit, the world is changing in every single direction. I mean, Netflix, he was talking about Netflix, a couple of years ago, and it's a project of the scope of The Crown is incredible. So the world is moving on, and certainly given that we are in this world of sort of consultations with all the right people there, as Robbie says, this is something that in any case was happening from really 2 years ago, that we've become much more good at communicating as a sector, that it would be a shame not in those conversations also to look to the future and not to sort of be blinkered about Brexit being the only issue here, so that we are looking to strengthen our sectors, look at convergence, if I can still use that word, across the sectors. What really are the opportunities for film in the next couple of decades, So I think that we can look positively on those questions, and the fact that we're coming together anyway, the fact we've got a very lively dialogue with our own government, that's perhaps a good thing.
Yeah, okay. Any more thoughts anything else you want to bring up before we'll go to the audience for questions? Anything?
One more,
No?
I think. I have one more, if that's okay. Which is to say that among the work that we're doing as part of the Screen Sector Task Force, we've commissioned legal advice on a lot of these points. So the one issue we haven't touched on is the status of European works. So this is something which affects European film and TV for broadcast quotas within Europe, and it's something that's governed both by the European Convention on Transfrontier Television and also the AVMS Directive, and we're very encouraged that the legal advice we've received is very reassuring that even if the UK were to leave the EEA, that we will continue to have that European work status, which is hugely important for anyone who's in the business of buying or selling content within Europe. So yet again, another point, hopefully, almost certainly of stability going forward.
Good point. Okay, we have two people walking around with microphones on either side, and let's see, we have somebody down here at the front with a question in front of me, my side here. You can put your hand up, sir. Black t-shirt. Yep. Down here at the front, third row from the front. Thanks.
Hi, good morning. I appreciate the kind of calming message that you guys are all sending out, but I wanted to address something particularly that Robbie said, which was that there was a fear that exchange rates that the pound would collapse, and that hasn't happened. But it absolutely has happened. In January, the pound was at 2.08, and just after Brexit, it dropped down to around about 1.5, which means that £1,000 in January would have got you 2,080 Canadian dollars, and right after Brexit now is only worth $1,500. And a lot of the Canadian producers that I've spoken to throughout July and August do have concerns about co-producing with British companies, and where they'd signed on to do co-productions and the Brits were going to put money into those, that money is now worth a lot less. If BBC Films or Film 4 was going to put $1 million into something, that's now worth $500,000 Canadian dollars less. And I think from a lot of Canadian production companies that I've spoken to, the feeling is, let's not rush to co-produce with UK companies until we see what that is. So, I do think it's good that you guys are here with this reassuring message that people should still work with the UK, and I say this as a Brit living in Canada, but there is a real concern here from Canadians about whether they should continue to work with the UK, and the exchange rate change has been a very real hit.
Absolutely not denying that whatsoever. But there is always currency fluctuation. You have to deal with that on a daily basis in production. Yes, it has been significant, but what it hasn't been, it hasn't absolutely collapsed in the way that people were saying. Yes, it will be advantageous to some areas for American companies coming in, but it is going to be, I didn't say there was going to be no disadvantage whatsoever. What I was trying to say is that the disadvantage is not probably as great as people are going to think, and it is a perceptual thing. So if the perception is that it is going to be difficult to do business with the UK because of currency fluctuation, this is why we're here to reassure people that it's not, and we will be able to work through those currency fluctuations. Obviously, you mentioned any kind of projects that have financing from a public body or from a national broadcaster. All of those broadcasters are going through the same kind of discussions, the same kind of approaches to how they're going to deal with that. It's not a static situation. It is dynamic. Nobody in the UK is in any way interested in not working both creatively and professionally and financially with partners across the world. So those creative solutions will have to be found, but we're here to do that, and we're here to provide that reassurance that we'll work with our partners to do. But if there is that sense that it's going to be difficult, just keep the dialogue up and talk to your partners, talk to the producing partners, and raise those concerns early, and we can all deal with them. Is that any way reassuring?
Are you satisfied with that?
I'm not convinced by the faces.
We have another question on the same side towards the back here.
Hi. I was wondering if you could make a comment about the impact on the availability of any sort of private equity over there, because I know, industries, investors outside of the cultural media, cultural sphere invest heavily into film and television products sometime when the economy's good, and I'm just wondering if there's been any sort of waves from the Brexit announcement.
Just from my own immediate experience, not. I mean, there's a lot of private equity around. It's expensive money, and I'm not seeing any change. I mean, obviously, exchange rate fluctuations are going to have an impact on that kind of, the way that we're moving of that kind of money. But at the moment, the gentleman who spoke about the Canadian exchange rate is right. It is the pound versus the Canadian dollar has dropped. It's about 1.7 now, I think. 1.73 is the rate at the moment. But the US dollar, in fact, is at the same rate as it was pre-Brexit. But in terms of private equity, I think it's still there, yeah. I mean, we live in a global economy where there's an enormous amount of money washing around. And as is the case in North America, as it is in Britain, there is quite a lot of private equity still around.
Since the referendum, I'm trying to think, 3 significant film productions that we're currently looking at or involved with, where is a combination of private equity, public funding from the UK, tax incentive for the UK, tax structures from other European countries, all 3 of them, and not one of those partners in any of those films has changed their terms or decided to pull out of those films as a result of the referendum. Right. And 2 of them in a kind of advanced stage of closing, and it doesn't look as if it's going to affect them. Yeah. And one of those has 14 different European partners, and it has not been affected.
Yeah, we're making a film at the moment, just in pre-production, a small film, £1 million film, and that's entirely financed by 100% by private equity out of the UK.
We've seen some big acquisitions as well, haven't we? I mean, in the not so much production finance,
yeah.
but Odeon Cinemas, of course. That was a brilliant moment to start investing in the UK infrastructure. So,
right. Yeah. Anybody else? Somebody else on this side, and then, but actually, we'll come back to you, sir. Can we have somebody at the back here on this side? Was there a lady at the back who had her hand up? Maybe not. Okay, let's come back to this side then. Yeah.
Right. Hey, everybody. So my question's more directed towards Paul. I'm interested in your experience, and I was hoping you could plug some of your movies and tell us more about your body of work.
And that I'm happy to talk to you afterwards about my movies, but I'm not sure how relevant that is to the question. And plug my movies, well, thanks very much. That's very nice to give me the opportunity, but I'm not sure it's the right stage to do that.
Okay, on this side here now, the lady at the back. Yeah.
My question is for Robbie. Post-Brexit Scottish referendum talk, how is that impacting your contingency plans for Scottish film?
The result of the referendum, we have actually not a majority Scottish Nationalist Party government, devolved government in Scotland, but they're ruling as a minority government in the devolved parliament. They do have an agenda to instigate another referendum to leave the United Kingdom. The current status of that is that, similar to the work that we're doing as a task force for our industry, saying, well, we're not going to actually act on anything and to see what the results of the negotiations are, our government are taking a kind of similar approach. What they have said is that if those negotiations don't go well, or if they are not a partner at the table while those negotiations are being made, or if they think that it's going to adversely affect Scotland, then they would bring up the notion of a second referendum on independence. Obviously, we have to think about that, but our main focus with our partners around the UK and elsewhere is about the Brexit negotiations, because that actually is real and is actually happening. So I think any further contingency planning about what it would mean for the screen sector in Scotland around independence referendum would have to happen at that point where we knew there was going to be another referendum for independence, which there's not at the moment.
And actually following on from that, I think earlier this week, was it the lead negotiator for the EU Parliament, Guy Verhofstadt, said that an independent Scotland would probably, there'd be no obstacle for it to rejoin the EU.
Well, that's very encouraging.
Any other? I think we've got 5 minutes left, so just a couple more questions if we have anybody else. Yes, gentleman here in the blue shirt.
With the inevitable unrolling of Brexit, do you see the current political leadership in Britain being willing to invest more in film and cultural industries as Britain devolves away from the EU, as a methodology or an expression of UK nationalism, UK culture being a leading cultural entity within the world?
I think it's a little early to talk hard numbers, but certainly this government and the previous Conservative government were, well, they really understood and levered the value of film and the wider screen industries with regard to soft power and so forth. There's something called the Great Campaign, which the idea is that if you're not from the UK, you'd know more about it than we would, because it's the export campaign from the UK, and they've used everything from James Bond and Harry Potter and Paddington to talk up the UK on the world stage. And of course, you know, the industries ourselves are very, very aware of the power that we have in that regard. So, I mean, certainly the thinking behind the Leave campaign was that we can be stronger for leaving, and that trade will increase, and therefore it seems reasonable to think that those conversations can happen. And as we said earlier, I mean, we know that the government is incredibly committed to the film industry. They've been very happy to restate the importance of the tax credits, which have grown under the last government, and you know, we hope this one too. So I think we've reason to feel optimistic that our interests will be heard and looked after, but beyond that, it's difficult to say at this point.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay, well, Guys, do you want to just give us a few closing thoughts or anything you want to just leave the audience with?
I can add a closing thought. My office in LA is actually in the British consulate. So while we're a small group that deals with the film and television sector, it's really interesting because we see how Brexit and the communication around Brexit is happening via the consulate across many different sectors that affect the US, Southern California, Arizona, what have you. And while we're all from LA and London, there is a British consulate here in Toronto that are doing the exact same things. So while there are questions, feel free to be in touch with any of us, but also there are people here on the ground that are dealing with it on a daily basis across multiple industries, so to just be aware that they're working toward all the same interests too.
I think I would probably say this is not to belittle or downgrade the impact or the possible impact of Brexit in any way, but in terms of our sector and our industry, as I said, there's quite a lot that will not be affected. Europe is not our only partner, the bilateral treaties. For want of a better phrase, if it is going to be a bump in the road, we know it is, but it's a bump in the road we can see coming over the horizon. It's not happened with no warning. We know there's time to plan. As Isabel said, technically, once Article 50 is triggered, there's 2 years, but it could take longer than that if everybody feels that needs to happen. So we can, as an industry, come together. The task force is in place. We'll look at those bumps in the road as they come along, and we'll plan for them. So I don't think it's going to be. Don't think it's going to make a monumental difference to our sector and our industry. And there may be opportunities there. Because any opportunity to look at what you do and see whether you can do it better I think is good.
Yeah. Before we go, I just want to say that at 11 o'clock, there is a panel that you might all be interested in too, Evolving Borders, Co-Productions in Europe. So stick around for that, 11 o'clock. Meanwhile, thank you so much to Isabel, Robbie, Paul, and Katie. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and all of our distinguished guests. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us for our next session, and please clear the house, but while you do, go into the lobby, have some nice coffee, recharge, refuel, and we'll see you back here at 11 o'clock. Thank you so much.